This is John 4, beginning in verse 1. John 4, beginning in verse 1. It says, Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, Give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Okay, well, Jesus answered her. Sorry, I had to make sure I was on the right one. Jesus answered her, If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, Give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. Jesus said to her, Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. Jesus said to her, Go, call your husband and come here. The woman answered him, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, You are right in saying, I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. The woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, it is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, What do you seek, or why are you talking with her? So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? They went out of the town and were coming to him. May you be blessed by this reading of God's word. There are, as a general rule, this is free advice for you. You like free advice? Free advice is always good. It's the only kind I give because nobody will pay me. Little free advice for you. When you find yourself in a debate or an argument of some sort, there are really 2 ways to do it, 2 ways to conduct yourself. The first way is to make sure that you have that you know the subject inside and out, that you have the facts on your side and truth in your corner. Now, that's probably best, but failing that, you can always take plan B. The second option is to evade at all costs, to change the subject whenever possible, preferably to something so innocuous, so far off track, that you'll never actually get back to the original question, and maybe the person who asked it to you won't even remember what precisely you were talking about in the first place. I'll give you an example of this. You see this in politics all the time. The art of politics is partly the art of what I think the jargon is staying on message. And what that means is never saying anything except what you intended to say from the beginning. So what happens, you'll hear questions asked to politicians, and they simply evade the original question and deliver the prepared remarks. And sometimes they have very little to do with what they were talking about in the beginning. You ask a candidate for Congress, pick an issue you want. You want to ask a candidate for Congress about immigration policy or something like that, and what you're likely to get is an answer about how much we owe to our immigrant forebears, the bravery of those who came to settle in this country, the spirit of gratitude with which they greeted their new life, and which, by the way, lay behind the first Thanksgiving in 1621 at the Plymouth Colony. Isn't Thanksgiving a wonderful holiday? Isn't it great to get together with your family and just express gratitude? And isn't that what America's all about? Anyway, getting together with your family and friends and sharing together in the bounty of the land. It's answering the question by not answering the question. And you know what? If you disagree with me then, you probably hate America and Thanksgiving. Evasion. Evasion is also, as it happens, a pretty, you know this if you've ever tried to share your faith with somebody. Evasion is a standard response to the gospel. People don't want to deal with it, and so they try desperately to change the subject. That was the Samaritan woman's response to Jesus here at this well in Sychar. The story in 4th chapter John here, the story as John tells it, is at this well in the Holy Land, and really the whole of the Middle East. Wells are kind of a big deal because it's still... this is somewhere in what is now Israel, the West Bank. It's still kind of drier than you would be used to. Wells are a big deal, and they tend to be deep, and people tend to gather there. It was usual for the women to go out and fetch water first thing in the morning, and then to go back out last thing in the evening as the sun was setting and fetch water, because you don't want to have to carry heavy water jars in the middle of the day, right? And they got together, and you could gossip, and you could, chit-chat. But Jesus finds himself there in the middle of the day when the sun is at its hottest. He was tired from travel. He was traveling back from Judea to his home in Galilee, worn out from the journey. And so he asked this local woman that he found at the well there to share some of the water she was pulling up with him. Now, at first, she seems to be pretty confused. Jesus was alone. It says that he sent his disciples into town to buy food. She probably could tell that it's hard to tell exactly how she knew he was a Jew. It might have been from his voice. It might have been his clothing. But there was somehow she knew right away that this is a Jew. And maybe his request was a trick. Maybe he didn't know how things work around here. How is it, she asks, that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? Now, I'm going to insult your intelligence here by giving you the 30-second version of the history of the Jews and the Samaritans, because you need to remember why this is a big deal. Samaria was, once upon a time, home to 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel, until the Assyrians invaded in 722 to 720 BC. So this is 700 years earlier. The Assyrians invaded. The Assyrians were the Nazis of the ancient Middle East. They wrecked everything and killed everyone. They were just a bulldozer of destruction. And the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, Samaria there, and they carried off a huge portion of the population into exile in other parts of their empire, and they moved in from other parts of the empire large numbers of people to live there. This was their means of preventing any kind of rebellion and things. If you scatter everyone everywhere, they're not going to work together against you. And if you're worried about the loyalty of a city like Samaria, well, just move 100,000 Assyrians into it. Whatever, I don't know. I have no idea how many. In any case, the locals did what locals tend to do, which is this is the way of the world, the way of life. A young man grows up and notices that the neighbor girl is pretty, and he marries her, and they have children. And before too many generations pass, you have a mixed-up mess of, and the problem is not a mixed-up mess here of ethnicity or anything like that. The problem here is a mixed-up mess of religion, a mixed-up mess of practices, right? And it got to the point that Jews didn't really consider Samaritans to be Jews anymore. They just considered them to be kind of half-pagan oddballs. And the Samaritans, predictably, didn't take that very kindly. The Samaritans had their own opinions of Jews, and they built their own. The Jews prohibited the Samaritans from coming to worship in Jerusalem, so the Samaritans did the logical thing. They built their own temple on Mount Gerizim in Samaria, and they wrote their own. They had their own copies of the Bible, to include in Exodus 20, and at the end of the Ten Commandments, an 11th commandment, that you should worship the Lord your God on Mount Gerizim, not in Jerusalem. A little bit of special pleading. Incidentally, you know that there are still Samaritans? There are about 500 Samaritans left in the world, and all of them live on Mount Gerizim in Israel. So there are not many of them, but they do exist. Jesus, though, he wasn't up. This is the old. He's not up for this old argument. This is a pretty tired argument, the Jew versus Samaritan argument. So he replies, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Now, the woman still doesn't understand what he's talking about. She complains, "Well, the well's deep. You don't have a bucket or a rope. How are you going to get this water?" Jesus said to her, verse 13, "Everyone who drinks of this water," meaning the well water, "will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." What's he talking about here? Well, this is a pretty common image, actually. It's a pretty common image in the Old Testament. It's an image that's used to depict the Lord. He is like a fountain of water, like a spring in the wilderness, because that fountain of water in the wilderness is a source of life and nourishment. And what Jesus is offering here is very simply himself. See, this woman, she has a lot in common with, well, everyone. Human beings think they know what they need. And if you ask people to come up with a list of absolute essentials, they're going to write things like food, oxygen, right, water, all of these. And then you get down the list a little bit, and other things that they need, they may feel that they need, certain kinds of material comforts, certain kind of relationships, whatever. But they're wrong. At the base, every human being has really two needs: forgiveness and love. Everybody needs forgiveness because we are aware of our guilt, whether we admit it or not, and love because that's what we were created for. And so in short, what people really need, this woman's asking for water, what Jesus is offering her is himself. She thinks she needs the water. What she actually needs is forgiveness and love. And in this case, the forgiveness and love of God. This is worth noticing. Too often, we present the gospel rationally. We try to lay it out in a kind of series of steps. And I'm guilty of this. I've taught it. It's true. And the gospel can be shared rationally, should be shared rationally, but we have to remember when we're sharing the gospel that people are not rational creatures. They're a whole lot more like cattle. We're a whole lot more like cattle than we'd like to admit. I grew up with cows, and Cows are erratic creatures. And they operate purely on an emotional level. And when they get scared, they get scared. When they get scared, they're dangerous. When they're comfortable, they're fine. People do this. Look, I've offended everybody this morning by pointing this out. So speaking of politics, we have herds. We pick a herd. Our herd's great. The other herd is terrible. And an awful lot of what we talk about when we're talking about politics, or when we're talking about any number of things, isn't so much about the issue itself as about how our herd is better than the other herds, whatever those other herds are. In any case, Jesus isn't giving this woman a rational gospel presentation. What he's doing is he just keeps prodding here to get below the surface. She's trying to evade. He could counter all her arguments, but he's not doing that. He's getting right to the heart of it. What does she need? She needs him, right? And and in him, she's going to find everything that she needs, living water welling up to eternal life. It's possible at this point that she still doesn't get it. It's hard to tell. It's also possible that he knew she was getting, that she knew he was getting religious on her and prodding a little too deep for her taste. And so she decided to play, she may be playing dumb. She says, "Sir, give me this water." Jesus' reply here, though, hits her like a ton of bricks, because he immediately, I said he's poking her here, and he immediately goes to the most sensitive spot. He says, "Go get your husband and come here." And all of a sudden she knows that she's dealing with somebody who is a little out of the ordinary. She was caught out. She said, "I have no husband." Jesus says, "You are right in saying that you have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband." Now, right here, she knows she's trapped. She's not getting out of this one. This is one of the situations where if you had a pocket knife, you might cut your arm off to get out of that situation. But she knows she's trapped. She's not getting out. The man in front of her has some kind of special knowledge. And she guessed correctly that he's a prophet of some sort. But faced with that challenge, she did what anyone will try to do, and that is one last evasion here, right? She says, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." And then she asks him something completely unrelated. "I perceive that you are a prophet. Should the Lord be worshipped on Mount Gerizim, as the Samaritans say, or in Jerusalem, as the Jews say?" She's trying to get him back to that old argument, that old fight, deflect the conversation in a pointless direction. But Jesus doesn't go for it. A little while earlier, and this is a really similar encounter in a lot of ways, although it's almost a mirror image to Jesus' encounter one chapter earlier with Nicodemus in Jerusalem. You remember Nicodemus went out at night to meet Jesus. And he paid him a compliment. He called him a teacher sent from God. And the two people couldn't look more different, right? Nicodemus was wealthy. He was powerful. He was well-educated. He was Jewish. He was well-respected. This woman at the well here is Samaritan. She's a woman, which was a debility? Debility? Is that even a word? Either way, you knew what I meant in the ancient world. She is almost certainly illiterate. She is a heretic. She's living an immoral lifestyle. And based on the fact that she's going to draw water at the well in the middle of the day, she's probably not very popular even in her town. Why would you go draw water when no one else is there? Well, maybe because the other people don't like you and don't want you to be there. suggests that she's something maybe of an outcast in her own community. And yet, Jesus said that what both this rich, powerful, well-educated man needed and this poor woman with a dubious marital history needed, they both have the same need. What they think they need something else, but what they fundamentally need is the forgiveness and the love of God that comes only through him. There was no fundamental difference between them. The time is coming, Jesus said, when God will not be worshipped in a temple made with human hands, but in spirit and in truth among his people. The woman's defense at this point cracks a little. She says, I know that Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he will tell us all things. And at that point, the hammer falls. And you can find other occasions in the Gospels where Jesus obliquely acknowledges that he is the Messiah. So, for example, when he asks Simon Peter, he says, who do men say? And Simon Peter says, well, maybe Elijah, maybe a prophet. He said, who do you say that I am? And he said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus at that point says that this has not been given to you by man, but by God, right? In other words, he's saying, yes, you're right. However, this is the only occasion, right here in John 4, this is the only occasion in all the Gospels where he just bluntly, straight out says, yep, I'm the Messiah. And he says, I who speak to you am he. And that's all it took. The woman who, as I said, apparently wasn't too popular, ran back into this town shouting to the others that she had found the Messiah and they should come and hear. His disciples came out and expressed astonishment. I love it. It's terrible, but they express astonishment here that they marveled that he was talking with a woman. Because it wasn't the kind of thing a guy did. They marveled that he was talking with a woman. And the woman, like I said, went off and told others, anyone she could talk to, about him. Now, I want to suggest to you just real quickly, three things you can take away from this for us. The first thing that we can take away from this is that while the initial response of the sinner to the gospel is evasion, trying to get out from under it, that the Lord himself is relentless. The Lord himself will track you down and drag you to himself. If he really means to have you, to make you his own, whatever defenses you throw up are going to be futile. So, if you find yourself in that position, stop. If you're trying to share Jesus with somebody you know and you love, and you're getting that evasion, that resistance, don't let it bother you. Don't let it bother you. He will have his own in the end. The second thing to take away from this is that we should never, if you get nothing else out of the story, one of the things is never, ever overlook somebody because they don't seem to be the right type to be a good Christian. No rabbi in his mind would have given this woman the time of day, let alone sat and had a conversation with her like Jesus did. And yet Jesus looked at her, and he didn't see a woman. He didn't see a Samaritan. He didn't see somebody with a seriously dubious marital history. He saw a creature made in the likeness and the image of God, a daughter of the Lord by his own redeeming. How many Samaritan, think about how many people do we run, I was going to say, how many Samaritans do we run into on a regular basis? None. There are only 500 of them. They all live in Israel. But how many people do we run into on a regular basis who look wildly unlikely? I could tell you stories, but I'd have to move to another town Because Bentleyville is a place where you'd instantly know who I'm talking about. But yeah, it's always surprising who comes to faith and who does not. And don't overlook somebody because they just don't look the part. How many people do we ignore as either too sinful or too proud or too different or too poor or too rich or whatever it is? Does the Lord not love them? Might they not respond to the gospel? How are we going to know unless we actually share it with them? The last thing to take away from this is this is really simple, and that is that there are no better evangelists. There are no better evangelists, no better ambassadors for the gospel than people who have met Jesus and been changed by him. This woman met Jesus, her life was changed, and she ran off to tell everybody. The Lord, as the Apostle Peter says, he is no respecter of persons. He uses the high and the lowly. He uses the rich and the poor. Evade him all you like. He will catch up with you. In the meantime, pray that he gives you eyes to look at other people the way he looks at them. Not as types, but as individuals made by God and valued by him. And when you do have the opportunity to run into these people, your task is really simple. Tell them what a difference meeting Jesus has made to you.